There were 3 plates on that table. I want you to picture them, because I have not been able to stop picturing them since. 3 plates, the good ones with the blue rim that I only take down twice a year. 3 sets of silverware laid out the way my mother taught me, fork on the left, knife turned in. A small cake in the center, chocolate, from the bakery on Fulton Street, with 2 candles on it, a 7 and a 2, because they don't make a cake big enough to hold 72. The clock over the stove said 9:48. I had started cooking at 1 in the afternoon. I want you to know that. Pot roast, because Marcus has liked pot roast since he was 6 years old and has never once in 39 years asked for anything else on an occasion. Roasted carrots and potatoes in the drippings. Green beans with almonds, because Patricia went through a phase in her 30s of saying she was eating better, and I have made them that way ever since, even though I don't believe she's thought about it once since 2016. The table was set by 4:30. There was nothing left to do after that, so I sat in the front room and watched the light move across the wall, and every few minutes I got up to check something that didn't need checking. The oven, the napkins, my hair. At 6, the pot roast was ready. At 7, I turned the oven down to 200 and laid foil over the pan. At 8, I took it out entirely because the edges were starting to go dry, and I stood in the middle of my own kitchen with 2 oven mitts on my hands and nothing left to carry. I called Marcus at 6. I called him again at 7 and at 8, and by then I had stopped pretending I wasn't counting. His phone rang 4 times each round and went to voicemail, and his voicemail greeting is one he recorded years ago, back when his voice still had warmth in it for me, and I listened to the whole thing every single time just to hear it. At 9:51, my phone lit up on the tablecloth. Not a call, a text. "Mom, we can't waste a whole evening on dinner tonight. Celebrate another day." I read it 6 or 7 times. I kept looking underneath it for a second message, an apology, an emergency, anything at all that would let me set the words down and pick up a reason instead. There wasn't one. Patricia never wrote at all. I sat there with my hands flat on either side of my plate, 72 years old, in a dress I had ironed that morning, and I looked at the 2 empty chairs across from me. I want to tell you what I did after that, because it is a small thing, and it is the truest thing in this entire story. I got up and I wrapped the pot roast. I portioned it into 4 containers with the carrots and the potatoes divided evenly between them, the way I have done with leftovers my whole life, and I stacked them in the refrigerator. I covered the green beans. I put the cake in a tin. Then I cleared the table, all 3 settings. I washed both of the plates nobody had eaten off of because they had been sitting out since 4:30, and I was not going to put a dusty plate back in a cabinet. That is what I want you to understand about who I was that night. My children did not come, and I stood at my sink at 10:15 washing 2 clean plates. I ate that pot roast for 9 days. I could not throw it out. I have never in my life thrown out food, and I was not going to start with that. And that was the night I finally understood something I had been refusing to understand for a very long time. My children hadn't just forgotten my birthday. They had forgotten everything I ever did for them. My name is Helena Ward. I'm 73 now. I've had another birthday since that one, and I'm going to tell you about it, because it is the entire reason I'm sitting here talking to you tonight. I was married to a good man named Thomas Ward for 39 years. I've been a widow for 9. I still live in the house we bought in 1979, a 4-bedroom on Chestnut Street with a porch that has needed painting for 6 years and a maple in the front yard that Tom put in the spring after we moved in. He staked it with 2 pieces of rebar and a bicycle inner tube. That tree is taller than the house now. That house matters to this story, so let me be plain about it. We paid $51,000 for it. Tom was at the plant 31 years. I kept books for a plumbing supply company on Delaware Avenue for 26. Between the 2 of us, it took 19 years to pay off, and I remember the night we made the last payment, because Tom bought a bottle of cheap champagne and we drank it out of coffee mugs on the porch steps. It was not a fancy neighborhood then, but the city grew out toward us. The university put a satellite campus 8 blocks north in 2004, and after that, the old houses on Chestnut started getting bought and gutted and flipped, one at a time, like teeth coming out. By the time I turned 72, realtors I had never spoken to in my life were leaving cards in my mailbox with numbers written on the back. $480,000. That was the number. That is what my children were doing arithmetic on. And I want you to hold on to it because they certainly were. Now let me tell you what came before it, so you understand exactly what they were adding up. In the fall of 1998, Marcus got into the state university, and we could not pay for it. Tom's overtime had dried up that year. The plant went to 4-day weeks for 11 months. And we had exactly enough in savings to cover a furnace or a semester, not both. I had my mother's jewelry, 3 pieces. A wedding band, a small engagement ring with a stone you'd have to squint at, and a garnet brooch that had belonged to her mother before her. That is the entire inventory of every valuable thing I have owned in my life. I sold all 3. I drove to a shop in Ashford, 2 towns over, because I did not want to be seen doing it. The man behind the counter was perfectly kind. He put a loop in his eye and turned each piece over and gave me a number, and the number was so much smaller than what those things were worth to me that I almost laughed. I took it. I sat in my car in that parking lot afterward with the envelope in my lap, and I cried for about 10 minutes, the ugly kind, with my hands over my face. And then I dried myself off, checked my eyes in the mirror, and drove home and told Tom I'd sold some old things I never wear. I never told Marcus. Not once. Not in 27 years. Not when he graduated, not at his wedding, not when he made a joke at Thanksgiving in 2019 about how he'd basically put himself through school. I sat right there and let him say it, because I did not want him carrying that. I thought that was love. I have had some time to think about it since, and I'm no longer sure it was. I think it might have been the beginning of the whole problem. Then came Patricia's children. Laura first, in 2006. Then the twins, 3 years later. Patricia went back to work at 11 weeks after each of them, and I had those children in my kitchen from 6 in the morning until 6 at night for 8 years. Not babysitting, raising. There is a difference, and anybody who has done it knows exactly what it is. I cut up their food. I taught all 3 of them their letters at my kitchen table with the flashcards I made out of index cards. I sat up with Laura for 2 nights when she had croup and slept in the chair beside her with my hand on her back so I'd feel her breathing. When she took her first steps, she took them across my living room rug from the coffee table to me, and Patricia saw it on a phone video I sent her at lunchtime with a note that said, "Don't be sad, she'll do it again for you tonight." She did not do it again that night. They never do. But I told Patricia she did, and I have never corrected that. When Marcus bought his first house in 2007, Tom and I lent him $22,000 for the down payment. When Patricia and her husband bought theirs in 2011, we lent them $19,000. Neither loan was ever repaid, and I want to be careful how I say this, because I do not want to sound like I am reading you an invoice. I never asked for either one back, not once, not in 18 years. I told them both it was a gift the day the checks cleared, because I did not want money sitting in the middle of my family like a stone in a shoe. And there were all the other things, the ones that never show up on any ledger anywhere. There was Ireland. Tom and I saved for that trip for 11 years. There was a jar, and then a savings account, and a folder in the desk with printouts of a bed and breakfast in County Clare, where his grandmother was born. We were going in September of 2009. In June of 2009, Marcus lost his job, and he had a mortgage and a baby on the way, and we canceled the trip and sent him the money instead. We never rescheduled. Tom died 6 years later and never saw Ireland. That one still gets me, if I'm honest, more than most things on this list. Not because of the money. Because he wanted to stand where his grandmother was born, and he never did. And there was nothing on God's earth stopping us except our own children. And there was my knee. I was supposed to have it replaced in 2012. It had been bone on bone for a year and a half by then, and the surgeon had already scheduled it. Then, Patricia's marriage came apart, and she needed somebody to drive her kids to school and to practice and to her attorney's office, and you cannot drive for a month after that surgery. So I put it off. And then I put it off again the next year, for a different reason. And then again. I limped on that knee until I was 68 years old. I still limp a little now, when the weather turns. That limp is the most honest record of my life that exists. It is the only thing that kept score. I did every bit of it gladly. I want that understood, because I don't want you thinking I'm a woman who kept a list all these years waiting for a chance to read it out loud. I did those things because that is what I believed a mother was, and I would do most of them over again tomorrow. But I did believe something in return. Not repayment. Not gratitude, exactly. I believed that when I got old, not helpless, just old, there would be people at my table. I thought I had been making deposits into something. I thought that at the absolute minimum, one night a year, 2 grown adults would sit down in front of 2 of those blue-rimmed plates. That was the arithmetic I had been doing my entire life. And on the night I turned 72, in front of a cake with a 7 and a 2 on it, I found out I had been the only one doing it. If you have ever added up everything you gave someone and realized they were never counting at all, stay with me tonight. Because 3 weeks after that dinner, I found out what my children had actually been doing while I was cooking pot roast, and it was so much worse than an empty chair. I should tell you about Tom's death, because everything changed shape after that, and it took me years to see how. He went on a Tuesday in March, 9 years ago, in the driveway, putting a bag of salt in the trunk. It was fast. The paramedics were very kind and told me there was nothing anyone could have done, and I have chosen to believe them. Marcus handled the arrangements. He was 36 then, and I was in no condition, and he was efficient and organized, and he took the whole thing off my hands, and I was so grateful I could have wept. I did weep, actually, in the funeral director's parking lot, out of pure relief that somebody else was carrying it. And that, I think, is where it started. Not with malice. With gratitude. Because in the weeks after, Marcus kept handling things. He came over and went through the mail with me. He sat at the kitchen table with the insurance paperwork spread out and told me which line to sign on. He called the utility company about the account transfer. He set up the online banking and chose the password and wrote it on a card in the desk drawer. And I let him. Of course I let him. I was 64 years old, and I had just lost the person I'd been talking to every day since 1975. And here was my son saying, "Don't worry about it, Mom. I've got it." Somewhere in there, "I've got it," turned into, "I've got this," and then into, "I'll handle it," and then one day, without anyone announcing it, into, "You don't need to worry your head about that. It happens by inches. It is never one conversation." That's the thing I most want to say to anybody listening who has a mother or is one. Nobody ever sits you down and takes your life away from you. They just keep helpfully carrying things until one day you notice you aren't allowed to hold anything. He came the next morning, 9:15. I know the time because I was still in my housecoat, and I remember being embarrassed about that, which tells you a great deal about how I was raised. He had no gift. He did not say happy birthday. He did not apologize, and he did not ask how I had spent the evening. He came in past me the way he always came in. Marcus does not wait to be invited into a room, and went straight through to the kitchen, and I watched his eyes go across that table. The cake was still sitting there under a dish towel. The 3 plates were still set, because I had not been able to make myself put them away. He looked directly at it, all of it. And then he set a folder down on top of it. "Mom, sit down a minute. We need to talk about the house." That is what I keep coming back to. He had gone somewhere and had documents prepared. Somebody had drawn them up, and they had gone into a folder, and the folder had ridden over in his car the morning after he skipped my birthday. He talked for 11 or 12 minutes. I let him. He talked about the gutters, and about the furnace being 19 years old, and about the property taxes going up again, and about how a house this size is really a young family's house. He used the phrase, "at your age," 4 times. I counted, the way you count when something is being done to you. Then he slid the papers across the table. What he wanted was for me to transfer the house into his name. Now, while it was simple, before it got complicated. He would take care of everything, taxes, insurance, repairs, the whole headache. I'd stay right where I was naturally. Nothing would change. And then he said the sentence. "It's better to handle this while you can still sign." I looked at my son, 45 years old, in a very good coat, sitting at the table where I taught him to tie his shoes, telling his mother to give away her house while her hands still worked. He had not come to celebrate my birthday. He had come to secure the inheritance. There it is. That is the sentence I would put on a headstone if they let you put a warning on one. It's better to handle this while you can still sign. I did not sign that morning, and what I found out 3 weeks later was so much worse than the folder on my table that I have still not entirely gotten over it. I told him I'd think about it. That was all I said. I have thought a great deal about why I didn't throw him out of my kitchen right then. I think it's because some part of me still believed I was misreading the whole thing. 72 years old, and I was still extending my son a benefit of the doubt he had not earned in 10 years. He left the folder on the table. He did not take it with him. That was deliberate. He wanted it sitting in my house where I'd see it every day. I put it in the bottom drawer of the sideboard. Then I took it back out and put it on the shelf in the front closet because I didn't want it in a drawer I opened. 2 weeks after that, there was a family lunch at Patricia's. It was the first time all of us had been in one room since the birthday that didn't happen. Nobody mentioned it. I decided I was not going to be the one to bring it up, and I have wondered since whether that was dignity or cowardice. Probably some of each. There were 11 of us around Patricia's dining room table. Marcus and his wife, Patricia and her boyfriend, the twins, Laura home from her 2nd year at school, and a couple of cousins on her ex-husband's side who still come around. I got through the soup. I remember the soup very clearly. Butternut squash, out of a carton. Then Marcus set his spoon down and said, to the table, not to me, about me. Mom needs to accept that she depends on us now. I want you to understand that there was nothing in my life at that time that supported that sentence. Nothing. I drove myself everywhere. I did my own shopping and my own banking and my own taxes with a pencil and a paper form, the way I have done them since 1971. I'd had a physical in January, and my doctor told me my numbers were better than her own. I had a bad knee, and I take 1 pill for blood pressure. That is the complete list of my dependencies. Patricia agreed with him immediately. She always agreed with him. She has agreed with Marcus since she was 4 years old, and it is the single most reliable fact of her personality. She said maybe it was time to think about selling the house. She said there were very nice 1-bedroom units over by her, and I wouldn't be so isolated. And wasn't it a lot of stairs? And then they started talking about the money. Right there, at the table, with me in the chair. Marcus said the market was strong, but wouldn't stay strong. Patricia asked whether the split would account for what Marcus had put in over the years. And Marcus said, of course it would. Her boyfriend asked a question about capital gains. Somebody said something about how much you get back on a kitchen. They were dividing up the proceeds of my house while I sat 4 feet away holding a napkin in my lap. I tried to speak. I got out 5 words. I said, I'm not sure I want, and Marcus turned to me the way you turn to a waiter who has interrupted you. Mom, let the adults handle this. Let the adults handle this. I was 72 years old. I had buried a husband and both my parents. I had run a household on a plant worker's wages through 2 recessions and 11 months of 4-day weeks. I had raised him and I had raised half of her children, and my son sat there in front of 9 people and told me to let the adults handle it. I did not answer him. I sat still and felt something in my chest go cold and very, very organized. And then, under the table, a hand took mine. Laura, 19 years old. She didn't look at me. She kept her face pointed straight ahead at her father's cousin, like she was fascinated by whatever he was saying about his truck, and she just held on to my hand hard for the rest of that meal. She was the only person at that table who noticed I was still in the room. I want that said plainly because of everything that comes later. Laura got nothing for it, and expected nothing, and did it anyway. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday, my phone rang while I was walking in from church. It was Laura, and she was crying, and the first thing she said was, "Grandma, don't be scared, everybody's fine." Which is exactly what her grandfather used to say, and exactly the wrong thing to say to a woman my age. Then she said, "Grandma, why is your house on the internet?" I did not understand the question. I want to be honest about how completely I did not understand it. I thought she meant a photograph. I thought maybe somebody had put the neighborhood on some kind of website. She stayed on the phone with me and walked me through it, slowly, because I did not have the app and had to make an account, and my hands were not working properly by then. There it was. My house. 41 Chestnut Street, listed for sale at $469,000. 22 photographs. Photographs of my living room, my kitchen. My dish towels were in the picture, hanging on the oven door handle. My bedroom with the bed made, and my mother's photograph on the nightstand where it has been for 30 years. Somebody had been inside my house with a camera, and I had not been home. I sat down on the second stair of my own front hall in my church coat and looked at pictures of my bedroom on a telephone. I want to try to describe what that does to a person, because it is not the same as anger. Anger came later, and it was almost a relief when it did. What I felt on that stair was something closer to what I imagine people feel after a stroke, a sensation that the world had rearranged itself while I was out and nobody had thought it necessary to tell me. The listing said, estate sale opportunity. It said, original owner, tremendous potential. It said the seller was motivated. The showing was scheduled for the following Saturday at 11 in the morning. It was on the listing, in bold, because it was an open house. They had scheduled strangers to walk through my bedroom while I was at church. Here is what I did, and I am not proud of the order of it. First, I sat on that stair for about 20 minutes. Then I got up and walked through every room in the house and matched them against the photographs to figure out when they'd been taken. And I worked out from the light and from which dish towels were hanging that it was a Sunday morning, probably 3 weeks earlier, because that towel went into the wash on a Monday. Marcus had a key. Of course Marcus had a key. He'd had a key since 1998. And then I did not call my son. I want you to notice that, because it's the difference between the woman who sat down on that stair and the woman I was by the time it was over. I did not call Marcus, and I did not call Patricia. I called Gus Hale. Augustus Hale wrote Tom's will and mine back in 1994. He was at Tom's funeral. He is 76 years old and still goes into his office 3 days a week because his wife passed in 2020 and he says he'll lose his mind at home. I have known that man for 31 years, and he is the only person I could think of who had known me back when nobody in the world would have described me as fragile. He answered on a Sunday afternoon. He listened to the whole thing without saying a word. Then he said, "Helena, I need you to go get the deed to your house, right now, while I'm on the phone. Do you know where it is?" I did know where it was. It was in the firebox in the closet, where it had been since 1998. It was still there, my name still on it, and Tom's, and nothing else. I heard Gus let out a breath. "All right," he said. "Then he doesn't own it, which means he had to be using something else. Helena, have you signed anything in the last 2 years?" And I said no. And then I stopped, because I had. 14 months earlier, Patricia had come over on a weekday afternoon with a folder and a pen. She said it was Medicare supplement paperwork. She said the enrollment window was closing and Marcus had gotten it all filled out for me, and it just needed my signature, and she was so sorry to rush me, but she had to pick up the twins at 4. There were, I think, 11 or 12 pages. She flipped them and pointed and said, "Sign here," and "Initial here," and "This one's just the same thing again," and I signed every place her finger went, standing at my kitchen counter without my reading glasses, while she looked at her phone and told me about her boss. It took under 4 minutes. I remember thinking how nice it was of Marcus to have handled the forms. I told Gus about it. There was a very long silence on the telephone. "Do you have copies of what you signed?" I did not. She had taken the folder with her. "Helena," he said, and his voice was different now, "I want you at my office tomorrow at 9. Don't call your children, don't warn anyone, and don't sign one more thing for the rest of your life without me looking at it first." It took Gus 11 days to find out what I had actually signed that afternoon in my kitchen. 2 of those 12 pages were a Medicare supplement application. That part was true, which is exactly what makes it work. That is how these things are always done. One real thing wrapped around the rest. Page 6 was a durable general power of attorney appointing Marcus Ward as my attorney in fact, effective immediately, with authority over all financial matters, including real property. I had granted my son control over everything I owned, standing at my own kitchen counter in under 4 minutes, without my glasses on. And page 9 was a listing agreement. But that was not the worst of it, and I need you to brace yourself the way I wish somebody had braced me, because Gus made me sit down before he told me the rest, and I understood then why he'd asked me to come to his office instead of telling me over the phone. 8 months before, using that power of attorney, Marcus had opened a home equity line of credit against my house. He had drawn $90,000 against it. $90,000. Against the house Tom and I paid off in 19 years and celebrated with cheap champagne on the porch steps. There was a lien on my home, and I had not known about it for 8 months because the statements went to an address that was not mine. He had changed the mailing address on the account, which the power of attorney allowed him to do. I asked Gus what the money went to. He said we'd find out, but he could already see some of it. $41,000 had gone to pay down a business line of credit in Marcus's name. $18,000 had gone into a joint account he shared with his wife. There was a payment to a company that sells restaurant equipment. There was, and I am not going to editorialize about this, $11,400 paid to a marina in the 3rd week of June. I sat in Gus Hale's office, and I did not cry. I have thought about why. I think it was because crying is what you do when something has been taken from you, and what I felt at that moment was not loss. It was the specific, clarifying rage of a woman who has just understood she has been farmed. That is the word I have used for it ever since, and no one has been able to talk me out of it. I was not robbed. I was farmed. For years. Carefully, patiently, the way you'd work a field, a little at a time so the soil doesn't notice. I asked Gus what we do first. He said, "First, we stop the bleeding, and we do it today, before he knows you know." Here is what we did, in this order, over 4 days. The power of attorney was revoked. Formally, in writing, notarized, with a copy sent by certified mail to Marcus and to every bank, brokerage, insurance company, title company, and physician's office that might have it on file. Gus's paralegal made 41 copies and mailed every one of them. The listing was killed. Gus contacted the brokerage with the revocation, and a letter that I gather was fairly direct, and the listing came down within 6 hours. The open house never happened. I have thought many times about what would have occurred if Laura had not been on her phone that Sunday. The bank was notified in person. Gus and I sat in a branch office with a young man named Devin and a woman from their fraud department, and I answered a great many questions about whether I had known about the line of credit, and I said no about 11 different ways, and by the end of it, That account was frozen. And the locks. I did change the locks. And I want to tell you the truth about that moment because it wasn't triumphant. A locksmith came on a Wednesday afternoon and did the front, the back, and the side door in about 40 minutes and charged me $230. And when he handed me the new keys, I stood in my own front hall and cried harder than I had at any point in the whole business. I don't think I was crying about the locks. I think I was crying because there had been a key to that house in my son's pocket for 27 years, and I was the one who had put it there. Now I have to tell you the hardest part of this whole story, and it is not the part anyone expects. The $90,000 did not go away. That is not how it works, and I think people believe it is. I certainly did. I thought that once we proved I hadn't known, once the fraud department opened a file, somebody would simply undo it. But he had a valid power of attorney at the time he signed. That was the entire point of page 6. The bank had done what banks do, the paperwork was in order, the money was gone into a business line of credit and a marina, and $18,000 I will never see again. Gus laid out my options over the course of 2 very long afternoons. I could pursue it criminally. Financial exploitation of an elder is a felony in this state, and Gus was blunt with me. He said we had a real case, better than most, because of the mailing address change. He said if I wanted to, he would walk it into the prosecutor's office himself. I could sue my son civilly to recover the money, or I could pay it off myself, clear the lien, and be done. I sat with that for 6 days. 6 days is a long time to sit with the question of whether you are going to have your child arrested. I want to tell you exactly how I decided because I still get letters. Well, I get messages now, Laura shows me. From women asking me how you make a decision like that, and the honest answer is that I did not make it nobly. I did not decline to press charges because I forgave him. I want to be very clear about that. I have not forgiven him. I am not sure I am going to. I declined because of the twins, because Marcus has 2 children who are 19 and 16, and because whatever their father is, they did not do it. And I could not find a way to put their father in a courtroom without putting the rest of their childhood in there with him. That is the whole reason. It was not mercy. It was triage. So I paid it. Tom's life insurance and our retirement savings together came to about $141,000. That was everything. That was 31 years at the plant and 26 years of bookkeeping and 19 years of a mortgage and all the trips we didn't take. $90,000 of it went to clear the lien on my house in a single-wire transfer on a Thursday morning in June, and I watched the number change on the screen in the bank office and felt something in me change with it. $51,000 left. Which, and I did not notice this until Gus pointed it out weeks later, is almost exactly what we paid for the house in 1979. My son cost me the entire second half of my husband's working life. That is the arithmetic. I have never said that number out loud to Marcus, and I do not intend to. Somewhere in the middle of all that, in Gus's office, he asked me the question that changed the whole direction of my life. He put down his pen and said, "Helena, what do you actually want to happen to that house?" And I sat there with my hands in my lap and realized that in 72 years, no one had ever asked me that. Not Marcus, not Patricia, not the realtors leaving cards in my mailbox with numbers on them. Everyone in my life had an opinion about that house. Not one person had ever asked me what I wanted done with it. I told him I needed some time. I spent about 2 weeks doing something I had never done in my life, which was sitting in each room of my own house by myself and asking what it was for. 4 bedrooms, mine and Marcus's and Patricia's, and the one where Laura and the twins used to sleep over. 3 of those 4 rooms had held nothing but boxes since 2011. I opened the closet in Patricia's old room and found a garbage bag of her high school clothes that I had been storing for 23 years for a woman who has never once asked about them. And in the middle of those 2 weeks, I thought about Doreen. Doreen Vasquez goes to my church. She sat 2 rows behind me for years, and we were the sort of friends who know each other's business without ever having been to each other's houses. 2 winters ago, Doreen's son moved her out of her own home. He said it was so she wouldn't be alone. She sold the house, his idea, his realtor, and the money went into an account he managed, and she moved into a finished room in his basement in Milford. 10 months later, there was an argument. I have never learned what it was about, and I have never asked because it does not matter, and because the answer is always the same anyway. It was about money, and it was dressed up as something else. Doreen, who was 79 years old, spent 11 nights sleeping in her car in a Walmart parking lot. 11 nights, in February. And nobody at that church knew. That is the part I could not get past. Not one of us knew, and we saw her every single Sunday, and she came in and sat 2 rows behind me in a clean coat with her hair done and sang the hymns. She was ashamed. That is why. That is always why. They are not silent because they don't need help. They are silent because they cannot bear for you to know that the children they raised put them in a parking lot. We only found out because a deacon happened to see her car at 6 in the morning on his way to work and recognized the bumper sticker. I gave Doreen $100 at the time and felt sick about it for a year afterward because $100 is not a place to sleep. It is not anything. It was a thing I did so that I could stop thinking about it, and it worked, and that is the part that shamed me. I had 4 bedrooms and 1 woman living in them. So I called Gus and told him what I wanted to do, and there was a long pause, and then he said, "Helena, that is going to take a considerable amount of work." And I said I had time. I said that according to my doctor, I had better numbers than she did, and God willing, about a decade. It took 8 months. I am going to tell you the real version of those 8 months, not the version where a nice old lady has an idea and then there's a ribbon. We incorporated a non-profit. That part is mostly paperwork and a filing fee and a lawyer who knows what he's doing. It has a name, the Chestnut House Fund. It has bylaws and a board of 5 people, 3 of whom I recruited out of my own church directory by calling them on the telephone and asking. The house went into an irrevocable transfer to the organization with a retained life estate for me. That last piece was Gus's condition, not mine. I'd have signed the whole thing over outright, and he refused to let me. He said, and I've quoted him ever since, "You are giving away what you don't need. You are not giving away the roof over your head. There's a difference, and at 72, you are entitled to know it." The purpose is written into the documents in plain English, because I insisted on plain English. Transitional housing for elderly women displaced by family. Not a nursing home, not a facility. Nobody wears a badge. 3 bedrooms, a shared kitchen, a lock on every door that the resident holds the only key to, and a caseworker from the county 2 days a week who helps them get their documents together, get into subsidized housing, get a bank account that their children are not on. That last one matters more than all the rest. Half of what happened to Doreen happened because her name was on nothing. The obstacles were relentless and they were boring, which is what nobody tells you. A 4-bedroom private residence is not a licensed group living facility, and turning one into the other involves the fire marshal, the zoning board, an occupancy variance, a second means of egress from the 2nd floor, hardwired interconnected smoke detection in every room, a ramp at the front, grab bars, a commercial-grade water heater, and a woman from the county named Ms. Abernathy with a clipboard who walked through my home telling me everything about it that was inadequate. The variance hearing was in November. I had to stand up in a municipal building and explain to 7 people at a long table why a 72-year-old widow wanted to put 3 strangers in her house. 2 neighbors spoke against it. I had known one of them since 1988. Doreen came to that hearing. She had not been asked to, and I did not know she was coming. She stood up during public comment in a clean coat with her hair done and told 7 people at a long table about 11 nights in a Walmart parking lot in February. The variance passed 4-3. The money came out of the $51,000 I had left. The egress window and the detection system and the ramp and the second bathroom ate 38,000 of it. I will not pretend that wasn't frightening. I have $12,000 in savings, a paid-off house I no longer own, Social Security, and a small pension from the plumbing supply company. That is my entire financial position at 73 years of age, and there are nights it keeps me up. Laura came home every weekend from October through February. She painted the upstairs hallway a color she picked out called morning linen, which I thought was a ridiculous name for beige until I saw it on the wall. She built 2 of the bed frames on the floor of what used to be her uncle's bedroom with an Allen wrench and a lot of swearing she thought I couldn't hear. She did not know about the $90,000. Not then. I did not tell her, because it was her uncle, and because a 19-year-old should not have to carry a thing like that. While all of that was happening, we finished the rest of it. The will was rewritten. Not to cut them out entirely, Gus advised against it, and, if I'm honest, so did whatever is left of my heart. They each receive a fixed amount. It is not large, because there is not much left, and what there is, I spent clearing a debt one of them created. They are removed from every account, every card, every beneficiary designation, and every emergency contact form at every doctor's office I have ever walked into. Gus and a small fiduciary firm hold my power of attorney now, not a family member, and I would recommend that to any woman my age listening to this. And Laura has an education trust, enough to finish her degree and begin her master's, held by the fiduciary firm, which neither of her parents can touch, borrow against, or administer. She had not asked for a thing. She did not know it existed. That was, in fact, the entire reason. The documents also name her as the family's liaison to the Chestnut House Board when she finishes school, if she wants it. If she doesn't want it, it passes to the board, and nothing is owed. Gus insisted on that language. He was right. I signed every page of it on a Thursday morning in January, in Gus's conference room, in front of a video camera he set up on a tripod, with my physician present, and a notary and 2 witnesses from his office. He recorded the whole thing. 40 minutes of an old woman being asked what day it is, what her assets are, who her children are, whether anyone is pressuring her, and whether she understands what she is doing. He asked me to explain the Chestnut House Fund in my own words, on camera, and I did. He said, "Someday somebody is going to argue you weren't yourself. This is how we win that argument without you having to be alive for it." When I set the pen down, my hand was completely steady. I noticed that, and so did he. Then I called my children and told them I needed to talk to them about my health and my estate. I have wondered whether that was cruel. I've decided it wasn't, because every word of it was true. I did need to speak with them about my health. I certainly needed to speak with them about my estate. What they heard was what they wanted to hear. We set it for a Saturday morning in February. I did not plan what happened next. I want to be honest about that, because it is the part everyone assumes I staged, and I did not. The sign company had told me 3 to 4 weeks, and it turned out to be 9 days. Marcus arrived 22 minutes early, in the good coat. Patricia pulled in right behind him, and in my front yard, under the maple tree Tom staked with rebar and a bicycle inner tube in the spring of 1980, 2 men from a sign company were setting a post into the ground. Chestnut House, a residence of the Chestnut House Fund, and underneath, smaller, transitional housing for women, 60 plus. I watched them from the front window. Marcus got out of his car and stood in my driveway looking at that sign for a long time. Long enough that one of the sign men said something to him, and he didn't answer. Then he came up my porch steps and did not knock, and found that his key did not work. When I opened the door, he said, "What the hell is that in the yard?" And I said, "Come in, Marcus. Mr. Hale is going to explain it." They came into my living room already talking. Patricia was saying something about how they'd talked, and they really did think a smaller place would be better for me. Marcus was still half turned toward the window. And then they saw the room. I was in Tom's chair. Laura was on the couch, She'd driven 3 hours that morning and didn't know why, only that I'd asked her to be there. And in the wing chair by the window, with a briefcase open on the coffee table and 5 folders squared up on it, was Augustus Hale in a tie. Patricia stopped in the doorway. Marcus did not. Marcus sat down on the edge of the sofa, rubbed his hands together once, glanced at the folders, and said, "Fine. Where do I sign?" And Gus Hale looked up over his glasses and said, in the mildest voice you have ever heard in your life, "You don't sign anything, Marcus. Your mother has already made every decision." I watched my son's face for the next 4 seconds. I would like to tell you, I didn't enjoy it. I have mostly made peace with the fact that I did. Gus went through it one item at a time, in order, the way he does everything. The power of attorney executed on the 14th of the month, 14 months prior, had been revoked, and notice had been served on 41 institutions. Marcus had no authority over any account, asset, property, or medical decision of mine, and had not had any since the previous spring. The listing on the property had been withdrawn. A home equity line of credit had been opened against the property using that power of attorney, and $90,000 had been drawn against it, and the mailing address on that account had been changed away from the property. That lien had been satisfied in full in June, from my personal savings, and the account was closed. The house on Chestnut Street was no longer part of my estate. It had been transferred irrevocably to a non-profit corporation. It would never be sold, split, refinanced, or distributed to anyone. I hold a life estate. I live there until I die. And then it belongs to whichever 3 women need it that year. The remainder of my estate, after 2 fixed bequests, goes to the Chestnut House Fund. Laura holds an education trust neither of her parents can access. And the reason for that last one was written into the document itself, because I had asked Gus to put it in writing where it could not be argued about later, because she was the only person who cared for her grandmother without asking for anything in return. Laura, on the couch, put both hands over her face. Marcus stood up. He said I had lost my mind. Then, remembering himself, he said I had been manipulated by Gus, by Laura, by somebody at that church. He said I was destroying this family. He said the word family 6 times in about 90 seconds, which is 6 more times than he had said it in the previous 4 years. And I said the thing I had been writing in my head since the night of the 3 plates. I didn't destroy this family, Marcus. I just stopped funding people who treat me like I'm already dead. Nobody said anything for a while. I could hear the clock in the kitchen and, through the window, one of the sign men tamping down dirt around the post. Patricia started to cry. She said she had never wanted any of this. She said it was all Marcus. She said she just went along with him because it was easier, and that she had never once said anything against me. And I looked at my daughter and I gave her the only thing I had left to give her, which was the truth. Patricia, you brought me the folder. She stopped crying. That is the thing I remember most clearly out of that entire morning, how completely and how instantly she stopped. You stood in my kitchen for 4 minutes and told me it was Medicare paperwork, and you pointed at the lines and I signed where you pointed. I did not have my glasses on. You knew that because you watched me not put them on. She said she hadn't known what was in it, and I said, I believe you. I actually do. But you didn't ask either. And Patricia, you took the folder with you when you left. She has never answered that. Not that morning, not in the 14 months since. Marcus went for the last thing he had. He said he would contest all of it. He said he would get doctors and get an attorney and prove I hadn't been competent when I signed. And Gus Hale, 76 years old, 3 days a week, the kindest man I know, slid one more folder across the coffee table and said, Please do. There is a 40-minute video recording of your mother executing every one of these documents, with her physician and a notary present, in which she explains all of it in her own words. There are contemporaneous letters from her doctor. And Marcus, If you file anything, the first thing that becomes part of the record is the address change you made on that credit line. I would encourage you to speak with your own attorney about that before you speak with mine." That was the end of it. There was some shouting in my driveway. One of the sign men asked me afterward, very politely, whether everything was all right, and I said yes. And he said, "Ma'am, that's a good thing you're doing," and went back to his truck, and I had to go stand in the kitchen for a minute. I want to be honest with you about the months after that, because I do not think these stories should end at the good part. That is where they always end, and it is a lie of omission. It was hard. It was extremely hard. There is a particular quality to the quiet in a house when your son has stopped calling, and it is not the same as the quiet of living alone. I know both, and they are different. I felt it every day for a year, and I feel it still. I second-guessed myself at 3 in the morning more times than I can count. Being right does not make you less lonely. Anybody who tells you otherwise has not done it. There were also practical humiliations. I had to explain to people at church why my house had a sign on it. A cousin of Tom's called me to say she'd heard I'd cut my children off, and did I know what that would look like at my funeral. I told her I did know, and that I intended to be dead for it. Marcus has not spoken to me since that Saturday. 14 months. He sent one email in April, through his attorney, about the fixed bequest. That is the whole of my contact with my son. His children, the twins, I have not seen either. That is the cost nobody warns you about, and it is the one that actually hurts. I did not take anything from those two, and they have lost their grandmother anyway, and I do not know how to fix it, and I have tried. Patricia and I have coffee once a month now. It's careful. It is nothing like what it was. But she comes, every month, and she does not bring up the house, and the last time she asked me a question about my knee and then actually waited for the answer, which she had not done in about 9 years. I am counting that. At my age, you count things. Doreen was our first resident. She moved into what used to be Marcus's bedroom in March, the week before my birthday. She apologized for 11 days. That is not an exaggeration. I counted because I count things now. She apologized for the noise she made getting up at 5:30, which is when she has gotten up her entire life. She apologized for using the washing machine. On the 4th day, I found her washing a single coffee cup and drying it and putting it away because she did not want to leave a cup in the sink in someone else's house. That is what it does to them. That is the damage. Not the parking lot. The parking lot is only where it ends up. The damage is that a 79-year-old woman does not believe she is allowed to leave a cup in a sink. I told her that if she washed one more thing that wasn't hers, I would put her out myself. She laughed. It was the first time. She has an apartment now, subsidized, 11 minutes from here. Her name and only her name on the lease and on the bank account. She comes back on Sundays. There have been 6 women through that house in 14 months. 6. The shortest stay was 5 weeks, and the longest is still going. The second one was named Ruth. She was 68, and she came to us out of a motel on Route 9 with 2 suitcases and a bird, and I want to be honest, I nearly said no about the bird. She stayed 4 months, and she is in Delaware now near a sister, and she still calls the second Sunday of every month, and the bird is fine. Not all of it works. I should say that too. One woman left after 9 days and went back to the son who had put her out, and I have not heard from her since, and I think about her more than I think about the ones we helped. I do not want to make it sound like more than it is. 3 bedrooms, 6 women. Against the size of the thing, it is almost nothing. It is more than $100, and in March, I turned 73. Here is what that table looked like. We put both leaves in, and it still wasn't enough, so we borrowed a folding table from the church basement and ran it out into the front hall, which meant nobody could get to the coat closet all evening. There were the 3 residents. There were 2 volunteers, and the caseworker and her husband. There was Gus, in a tie. There was Doreen's sister, who drove down from Erie. There were 4 people from the block whom I had waved at for 20 years and never once had inside my house, and one of them brought a green bean casserole that nobody asked for, and everybody ate. There was Laura, who had driven 3 hours again. 19 people. I counted. Laura brought the cake in from the kitchen. Chocolate, from the bakery on Fulton Street, the same as the year before, with a 7 and a 3 on it this time. And they sang. 19 people badly, the way people do. Before I blew them out, I said the only thing I had to say, and I'll say it to you the same way. I spent years waiting for my children to choose me. At 72, I finally chose myself. Then I blew out the candles, and Doreen cut the cake because her hands are steadier than mine, and it was the best birthday of my life. I mean that without any decoration on it whatsoever. 73 years, and that was the best one. I still don't know how this ends with Marcus. He is my son. I carried him, and I sold my mother's rings for him, and I would still, God help me, walk into traffic for him. And I am aware of how that sounds after everything I've told you. Loving somebody and financing them turned out to be 2 entirely different things. It took me 72 years and 1 empty dinner table to learn the difference, and it cost me $90,000 and a child to learn it properly. The 3 blue-rimmed plates are still in the cabinet. I use them now. They're in the rotation, along with everything else, because there are always more than 3 of us. There are 3 bedrooms upstairs and 3 plates in that cabinet, and it has stopped feeling like a coincidence to me. Family is not the people waiting to receive everything when you die. It is the people who stay beside you while you are still alive. So let me ask you, because I have never been able to settle it myself, not at 3 in the morning, and not on the good days either. If they had been your children, your table, your house, your son telling you to sign while you still could, your daughter standing in your kitchen pointing at the line, would you have forgiven them? Or would you have changed the will too? I know what I did. I am still not certain it was right. I only know that I am not sitting alone anymore.